this video, we will be covering how strong is the Millennium Godzilla, also known as Godzilla 2000. So back in the 90s, after the last Heisei era movie, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, Toho was going to take a break from making Godzilla movies until roughly around the 50th anniversary of 2004, and let the US take a crack at making monster films for the Big G. However, that all changed after the cold reception that was the 1998 TriStar movie got. This negative feedback threatened to ruin the image of the beloved King of the Monsters, forcing Toho out of early vacation in order to show the rest of the world how it's done, kickstarting an entirely unplanned new era of Godzilla films, which, while didn't last as long as both the Showa nor Heisei era, it was all the same just as influential and important to the franchise as a whole, serving as an introduction to a bunch of new monster fans, specifically ones growing up in the early 21st century, myself included. For some bizarre reason, Toho decided that for nearly every film of the Millennium Era would be their own separate continuity, with each film being some alternate sequel follow-up to the original 1954 film, the first of which will be Godzilla 2000, also known as Godzilla Millennium 2000. Despite being called Godzilla 2000, the movie did not actually come out in the year 2000, although Pokemon is also guilty of this crime as well. I suppose if we count the American version of the movie, it did actually come out year 2000. And boy, I gotta say, this poster goes wild. Starting off in the film, we follow a trio of human characters who basically make up what is basically the Godzilla Weather Organization. You heard of that movie Twister, which for some bizarre reason just recently got a sequel after 30 years? Well, it's like that, but if the Twister was Godzilla. Anyway, Godzilla shows up, destroys some buildings and a power plant, apparently for no other reason than Godzilla's just a dick to humans. We also see people investigating a 60-million-year-old asteroid that crash-landed and is apparently powered by even the smallest bit of light, even if it's artificial, as just shining a light on this thing causes it to rise up out of the ocean, revealing an alien UFO. The military has a new weapon referred to as full metal missiles, seemingly powerful enough to punch through Godzilla's thick hide, or as the English dub of the movie puts it, like crap through a goose. And sure enough, when they actually do start using the missiles, if you look closely, you can see pieces of Godzilla's hide being blasted off, and you can even see left like a bit of a hole mark around his chest. Before Godzilla decides to finally start fighting back, the UFO finally decides to fly in, and has a brief fight with Godzilla, or blasts him away with its, well, UFO cannon. However, Godzilla's finally able to retaliate, and manages to cause a little bit of damage to the UFO, before the two part ways. After the battle, the main human character picks up a piece of Godzilla's skin that fell off during the fight, and analyzes it in a lab where he discovers that the skin cell has completely healed after just 5 hours. No scar tissue at all. He then makes the discovery that because of this, Godzilla might actually be immortal, and his fast healing seems to be tied to a specific cell in his body, which he names Regenerator G1, or Organizer G1, depending on the version you watch. The UFO takes over a building and basically starts stealing data from the human computers, trying to find out more information about Godzilla. I should note that there is this one point in the movie where this one lady has a laptop screen and it shows information on Godzilla, but I can't read out what it says in the text since it's in Japanese. There's another one later in the movie that looks like it might be in English, but it's kind of hard to read from this angle. Soon round 2 begins between Godzilla and the UFO, but the UFO manages to knock down Godzilla again and restrain him using electrical cables that it summons from underground using its psychic powers. It then extracts Godzilla's DNA, allowing the Millenniums inside the UFO to finally emerge in the giant tentacle monster form. Okay, believe it or not, the manga it's a lot weirder with them taking the form of the human kid character. And yes, this is the only image I'm going to use of it. For those who know, you know. However, they find out the hard way that Godzilla's DNA doesn't quite agree with them, and they soon mutate into the lovable Orga, whose design is apparently partially based off the 1998 TriStar Godzilla's design. Despite having massive hands, Orga's pretty slow and not a really good fighter. Godzilla easily dodges his first swing, but the second one manages to land and actually knocks Godzilla back a bit. However, Godzilla is able to retaliate on his own, even at one point in the fight knocking Orga over with a tail swipe. Orga can actually jump quite a distance, reaching about 100 meters in jump height. He's got a shoulder cannon that can fire out the same kind of energy blast as the UFO, and has regeneration similar in quality to Godzilla's. Though I should note that when Godzilla lands a hit with his atomic breath, Orga's shoulder cannon does not regenerate. So maybe his regeneration isn't as good as Godzilla's after all. He's also able to remotely command the UFO to attack for him, as well as shield him from Godzilla's atomic breath, though Godzilla is finally able to put the thing down for good with an atomic breath. When Orga bites down on Godzilla, you can actually see his skin turning green while he does this, and apparently after doing this, Orga enters a second form, which is mainly identical to the first form, except for being 5,000 tons heavier. It is hypothesized that if Orga was able to fully absorb Godzilla's DNA, he would turn into a perfect clone of Godzilla, even though he'd obviously have to be a lot heavier and taller as well. He opens up this big gaping mouth, inviting Godzilla to just come on in, which he shockingly does. Though apparently this is just a plan for Godzilla to blow him up from the inside to test and see if his regeneration is just as good on the inside as it is on the outside, and he blows him up with his nuclear pulse ability, something which we haven't seen since the Heisei days. In the manga, Orga actually just turns into a giant crocodile monster, which is like the size of a skyscraper, but Godzilla defeats him the same way all the same. The nuclear pulse explosion blows off Orga's head, which I guess he can't regenerate from, huh? Makes you wonder what would have happened if the humans targeted Godzilla's head with those full metal missiles, if he would have been able to regenerate his head. So how strong is Godzilla 2000? Well, first off, we should establish that this movie is actually a sequel to the original 1954 film, as confirmed from not one, not two, but three separate sources, the third one being an official Toho website, which got absorbed into the now current official Godzilla website back in 2017. But I don't know, maybe you can use the Wayback Machine to see what it was back then. But the point is, there's more than enough evidence to confirm that the 1954 film happened in this continuity, which is good because that's the closest we'll ever get to getting an official origin for this specific Godzilla, since his origins never actually brought up in the movie, funny enough. This means that this Godzilla should at the bare minimum scale to the original 1954 Godzilla, who we established to be in the high mountain level range, with transonic reaction speed, due to being able to react and take out jets. Seeing as how he's like 5 meters taller and 5,000 tons heavier, obviously he would have to rank at least a little bit stronger than the 1954 Godzilla. So I'll say at the bare minimum island level as the most you could lowball him. However, if that isn't good enough for you, then that's fine, because he's got more impressive feats going off the movie itself. Before that, however, I wanted to settle the debate on who is stronger between Godzilla and Orga. Orga definitely takes a lot of damage from Godzilla's atomic breath, and if it weren't for his regenerative abilities, he'd be dead. The only time we ever really see Godzilla take like true damage is against the full metal missiles earlier in the movie, since we can clearly see damage being done to Godzilla's chest. This is even more noticeable in the manga. Not to mention, as stated before, Orga's regeneration is not perfect because he lost his shoulder cannon with healing, putting him at a significant disadvantage compared to earlier in the fight. Orga should, on paper, be stronger than Godzilla, having at least somewhat similar regenerative abilities. His shoulder cannon beam should be somewhat comparable in power to Godzilla's atomic breath. His larger hands, which would enable him to lift Godzilla like a giant dumbbell, as well as having longer reach due to his arms, should on paper make Orga a better fighter than Godzilla, but he really isn't. In fact, Orga's kind of a coward throughout most of the fight, preferring to have the UFO do the fighting for him most of the time. Orga should have the power and agility, and most importantly in my opinion, weight and reach to be able to take on Godzilla in a close fight, but he kind of avoids close combat against Godzilla for the most part. That being said, physically, Orga should at the bare minimum be at least a little bit stronger than Godzilla, but like I said, he doesn't seem to take advantage of his advantages over Godzilla. And while Orga can knock Godzilla back with a slap, Godzilla has been shown at the beginning of the fight to be able to dodge said attacks, as well as also knock Orga back with a tail swipe. Godzilla mainly scales to the Millennium UFO, which, with an official length of 200 meters and weighing 19,000 metric tons according to the official theater program, is noted in some guidebooks to be capable of moving at sublight speed, which is roughly like 92% the speed of light at the highest. This makes sense seeing as how it's an alien spaceship, and usually in a lot of sci-fi stories, those kind of ships that are capable of space travel are at least somewhat relative to the speed of light, if not faster than light. Seeing as how the UFO was able to survive a crash on Earth 60 million years ago, and the amount of energy it would take to move such a large vessel at that kind of speed comes out to about 63 teratons of TNT at the lowball end, to as high as 633 teratons of TNT, which is just knocking on the door to reaching continent level, so large country level plus. Seeing as how we see the UFO move at varying speeds throughout the movie, I'm not 100% on board with the idea that just because Godzilla is able to hit the UFO means that he's able to react and move at the same exact speed as the UFO. After all, there's one scene in the movie where we see helicopters flying alongside the UFO. You mean to tell me those helicopters are also moving at near the speed of light? Maybe that's how fast the UFO moves when it's in space. I don't know. But I guess as a highball end, you could say that Godzilla's attack speed is relativistic plus, although a separate calculation puts the speed of his atomic breath around Mach 4. But seeing as how Godzilla's atomic breath was eventually able to destroy the Millennium UFO after hitting it a few times, or with sustained fire, Godzilla would have to scale in attack power to the durability of the UFO. So still country to large country level plus. As for his intelligence, he should at the bare minimum be as smart as the original Godzilla, who was able to find out that humanity was responsible for destroying his home and family, and sought vengeance against them. Similarly, this Godzilla holds a grudge against humanity, and is able to figure out that destroying the power plants will weaken them. He was also able to figure out how to get past Orga's regenerative abilities by blowing him up from the inside. So I definitely say he has closer to more human levels of intelligence. Overall, this Godzilla has a very strong placing in the rankings, all things considered. Apparently during development of the movie, it was supposed to be 2 more movies that would have followed up this one. That's right, Godzilla 2000 was supposed to be the start of a trilogy, and we at least know some information about the sequel, Godzilla Reborn, which would have actually been developed by Sony and would have involved Godzilla rampaging in Hawaii, where he'd fight a lava bat monster. But sadly, this was not to be. But I don't need to tell you that this Godzilla was the face of the franchise for people growing up in the early 2000s, mainly thanks to the video games that were coming out at the time. But that's a story for another day. Join me next time as we cover the second entry in the Millennium Era, Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. Stay tuned for that, folks. Take care.